There is a chair in the presence chamber of Harrogate that no living person is permitted to sit in. And on the morning this story begins, I watched a woman decide that the rule did not apply to her. I am Edrin Vale, and for 19 years I stood the throne room post of the royal house of Eldermoor. I say stood, because standing is most of what the post asks of a man. You learn the exact weight of your own boots. You learn the length of an hour measured in the drip of candle wax and the slow travel of windowlight across a marble floor. You learn to be furniture that breathes, so that when at last you must be something else, a wall, a hand, a witness. No one in the room has thought about you for so long that they have forgotten you can move at all. That forgetting is the guard's oldest weapon, and I have used it more than once. I used it that morning, though I did not yet know I would. The chair I speak of stood a half-pace to the right of the king's great seat, on the same broad dais, beneath the same canopy of worked silver, and it was smaller than the king's throne and higher-backed and older by 2 centuries. It was the dowager's throne, the seat of the Queen Mother, and its rightful holder, Rosalind of Harrogate, had been dead 11 days. For those 11 days the chair had worn a veil, a length of gray silk, plain as a nun's shawl, laid over the seat and the arms and drawn down to the floor, so that the shape of the throne showed through it like a face under a sheet. That was the custom. When a queen mother dies, her throne is veiled and left empty for the 40 days of the realm's mourning, and no one, not the king, not the heir, not the highest lord living, takes that seat while the silk is on it. Then on the 40th day, the veil is lifted by the hands of the master of the household. The throne is carried in solemn procession to the Hall of Kings, and it stands there forever after among the empty thrones of the dead, honored and unused. The seat is never inherited. A queen mother is a queen mother by blood and by years and by the raising of a king. The title cannot be married into, bought, or seized. When she dies, the office dies with her, and the chair becomes a monument. 11 days, 29 still to run. I tell you all of this first, before I tell you what happened, because the whole of what happened turns on it, and because I have found that people who did not grow up inside a palace often do not believe that a chair can matter so much. They think a throne is only a fine seat, and that the fuss around one is vanity dressed in ceremony. They are wrong, and Queen Mother Rosalind was the one who taught me why they are wrong. And so it is a bitter thing that the first person to prove her right, 11 days after her death, did it by trying to prove her wrong. Her name was Morwenna, the Queen Consort, the king's second wife. I had best be plain about the shape of the house, so you are not lost. King Alaric had married twice. His first queen, Isolde, had given him 2 children, the Crown Prince Rowan and the Princess Elira, and had died young, of a fever that took her in a single winter, when Rowan was a boy of 10. For 6 years after that Alaric wore black and married no one, and the realm loved him the more for it. Then he took Morwenna to wife. She came from a lesser house with a great deal of ambition and very little land, and she brought with her 2 grown children of her own from a first marriage long since ended, Lord Cassius, sleek and watchful, and Lady Verena, who laughed at everything and meant none of it. Morwenna was crowned Queen Consort, which is to say she was the king's wife and wore a crown at his side, and that is a high thing, the second highest lady in the realm. The highest was the Queen Mother, Rosalind, Alaric's mother, a woman of 80 when she died, who had buried a husband and a son and a daughter-in-law, and had never once, in all the years I served under her eye, let the realm see her flinch. She had raised Alaric to be a king. She had, in her last decade, half raised his children too, after Isolde died. It was Rosalind who taught the boy Rowan to sit a horse and to sit still, and which of those is harder no one who has not done both can say. Morwenna, second lady of the realm, had spent 11 years as second lady of the realm, and had not, I think, spent a single one of them content with it. Now the first lady was dead, and the seat of the first lady stood veiled on the dais, empty. I want you to understand that I did not, at first, believe she would do it. I had watched Morwenna a long time. I knew the shape of her wanting the way a guardsman comes to know the habits of everyone who passes his post, not their thoughts, which are hidden, but their motions, which are not. I had seen her pause by the veiled throne on the second day of mourning, and look at it with an expression I did not have a name for. I had seen her, on the fifth day, stop the master of the household in the long gallery and ask him. I could not hear the words, only the shapes of them, some question that made the old man bow very low and say something that made her turn away with her chin up. I had thought then, she is grieved and unsettled as we all are, and she is finding it hard to be near the empty seat. I gave her the kindness of that reading. I was wrong too. On the 11th morning I came on to the post an hour before the chamber was opened, as was my custom, to relieve the night man and to have the room to myself while the light came up. The presence chamber faces east. In the first hour the sun comes low through the tall windows and lies in long gold bars across the floor, and touches the dais last of all, and there is a handful of minutes when the veiled throne seems to glow gray gold under the silk, and I do not mind telling you that in those 11 days I had come to treat those minutes as a kind of prayer. I did not pray in words. I stood my post, and I let the light do it for me. That morning when I came in, the light was already on the dais, and Morwenna was standing before the veiled throne with her hand on the silk. She was not alone. Lord Cassius stood a little behind her, and a page boy hovered at the foot of the dais holding a folded cloth, and the master of the household, a gray, careful man named Havard who had served the house longer than I had been alive, stood at the side with his hands folded, and his face doing the very difficult work of showing nothing at all. I stopped inside the door. I did not announce myself. A guard entering his own post does not announce himself. He simply is there, and people account for him or they do not. Morwenna did not turn. Cassius did. His eyes came to me, marked me, weighed me, and went back to his mother with the faint dismissal of a man setting down a tool he has decided he will not need. "It is only silk," Morwenna was saying. Her voice was low and reasonable, the voice of someone explaining a small thing to a slow child. "Havard, I am not asking you to do anything improper. I am asking you to lift a piece of cloth. The chamber will be full within the hour. The realm is frightened and grieving and leaderless, with the king 300 miles away at the frontier and not expected for a week. Someone must sit at the head of this room and let the people see that the house still stands. That is all. That is the whole of it." "Madam," said Havard and stopped. He was a man who chose words the way a jeweler chooses stones, and I watched him reject 3 or 4 before he found the one he could bear to set. The seat at the head of this room is the king's. It is not veiled. It waits for him as it always waits for him, and it needs no one to warm it in his absence. The realm knows the king lives. No one doubts the house stands. "The king's throne," said Morwenna, "sits empty and empty and cold is exactly the message I am trying to spare us. I do not propose to sit in the king's throne. I would not dream of it." She let her hand slide down the silk slow to where the curve of the armrest showed beneath. "I propose to sit here, beside it, where the second seat of the house has always stood, where a woman of this house may fittingly sit." "That seat," said Havard, and this time he did not hesitate, "is the Queen Mother's." "The Queen Mother is dead." "Yes, madam, 11 days dead, and her seat is veiled for 29 more, and then it goes to the Hall of Kings, and no one sits in it between. That is not my rule to bend. It is not the king's rule to bend. It is the rule." There was a silence on the dais then, and into it the gold light climbed another inch, and I stood by the door and was furniture that breathed, and I thought, "He is right, and she knows he is right, and being right will not be enough." I had seen that particular silence before. It is the silence of a person who has been told no by someone who has no power to make the no stick. Havard was the master of the household. He kept the keys and the plate and the order of precedence at table. He could refuse to lift the veil with his own hands, and he did, and that refusal cost Morwenna nothing at all, because there were other hands. She turned her head at last and looked at the page boy at the foot of the dais, a child of perhaps 12 in the house livery, holding his folded cloth, his eyes very wide. "You," she said gently, "come and take the veil off the chair." And the boy, God help him, took one step. I moved then. Not fast. I have never in my life needed to move fast in that room, and moving fast in that room is itself a kind of failure, a confession that you let a thing get away from you. I crossed the floor at the pace of a man with somewhere to be and no fear of not arriving, and I came to the foot of the dais, and I put myself, without hurry and without a word, between the page boy and the steps. The boy stopped. He looked up at me. I am a tall man, and the bearskin makes me taller, and to a boy of 12 I imagine I was most of the sky, and I looked down at him, and I did the kindest thing I could do, which was to give him a reason not to have to choose. I held out my white-gloved hand, palm up, for the folded cloth he carried. He gave it to me. Relief went over his small face like water. He stepped back and back again, and was gone to the side of the room where the other servants stood, and the moment in which a child might have been made the instrument of a thing he could not understand was over, and I had ended it without saying one word, and that I will tell you now, so you understand where the whole story is going. That is the entire art of the post. Not the sword, not the rifle, the interposed body, the unhurried no that costs the other person the use of the hands they meant to borrow. Morwenna looked at me for the first time. I have been looked at by angry great ones more times than I can number, and there is a whole vocabulary in it, and I had learned to read it young. There is the hot look, which is only temper and burns out. There is the cold look, which is contempt and does not. And there is a third, rarer look, which I got from Morwenna that morning, and which I did not like at all, because it was neither hot nor cold. It was calculating. She looked at me the way you look at a door you had not known was there, deciding whether to go around it or through it, or whether to simply wait until someone came who could take it off its hinges. "Sergeant," she said. She knew my name. She chose not to use it. That is its own message, and I received it. "You are holding a piece of the house's linen." "Yes, madam." "Put it back where you found it." "It is not mine to place, madam," I said. "It is the master of the household's linen, and I will return it to his hand." And I turned, unhurried, and I carried the folded cloth to Havard and laid it in his hands, and in doing that I had answered her order without refusing it. I had done exactly the thing she said, put it back, and made it mean the opposite of what she meant. Havard took it. His old face did not move, but his eyes came to mine for the length of a heartbeat. And in 19 years of standing near that man, it was the first time I ever saw him look at me as at an equal. "This is absurd," said Lord Cassius, speaking for the first time. He had a light, carrying voice, a voice built for rooms. "Mother, come away. There is no dignity in wresting a chair from a footman and a doorpost." He said doorpost looking straight at me, and I let it land and did not so much as blink, because a guard who cannot be called a doorpost without flinching has no business being one. "The king will return within the week. Speak to him. He denies you nothing. If it is your wish to sit above the room at the memorial assembly, he will grant it with a word. And then it is done properly, by the crown, and no one," he glanced at Havard at me, "no one below the crown can say a syllable against it." It was good advice. I remember thinking even then that it was good advice, and that if Morwenna had taken it, the whole terrible morning that was coming might never have come. Wait for the king. Ask the king. Let the crown grant it, and let those of us who guard the rule be overruled by the only man with the standing to overrule us. I would not have liked it. I would have obeyed it. A guard obeys the crown. That is the whole of what a guard is for. But Morwenna did not want it granted. I understood that, watching her face while her son said the reasonable thing. She did not want the throne given to her. A thing that is given can be ungiven. A thing that is granted has a grantor and stands above you forever as the one who let you have it. She wanted to take it. She wanted the realm to look up and see her in that seat, and understand that she was in it not by any man's leave but by her own weight, because she was there and no one had stopped her. And possession, as the lawyers say, is 9 points of the law and the 10th is nerve. "The king," she said to her son, "grants me the courtesy of his bed and the loan of a crown and the second place at every table in this kingdom, and I have been grateful for 11 years, and I am done being grateful." She said it quietly. She was not a shouter, I will grant her that. "His mother is dead. There is no first lady of Eldermoor now but me. I do not need it granted. I need only sit down." And she turned back toward the veiled throne. But the veil was in Havard's hands. I had seen to that, and it was not on the chair, and to sit in a veiled throne is one kind of trespass, but to sit in a throne whose veil a guard has just carried away in front of the whole household is another, cruder kind, and even Morwenna, I think, felt the difference. She stood before the empty seat with the gray silk gone, and the gold light on it, and for a moment the whole thing hung in the balance of whether she would simply sit and dare us all. She did not that morning. It was too raw, too bare, too plainly a theft with no cloth of ceremony over it. She was cleverer than that. She wanted a stage and a full room, and the memorial assembly 3 days hence would give her both. 3 days, she said, to no one or to the chair. Then she gathered her skirts and came down off the dais, passed me, close, and paused and said, so low that only I could hear it, "You will not always be standing where the thing is easy, Sergeant." And she was gone, with Cassius behind her, and the page boy fled, and old Havard and I were left alone on the dais with an unveiled throne between us and the morning light pouring in. Havard let out a long breath. "Reveil it," he said, and handed me back the gray silk with hands that were not quite steady, and I climbed the dais and laid the silk over the Queen Mother's throne the way I had seen it laid 100 times, seat and arms and down to the floor, until the shape of it showed through like a face under a sheet, and I stepped back down, and we both stood and looked at it. "She means it," I said. "She means it," Havard agreed, "and I cannot stop her, and neither can you, and the king is 300 miles away." He looked at me sidelong. "Do you know who can?" I did not answer because I did not yet know, and because the answer, when it came 3 days later, would not be spoken aloud at all. I should tell you about the Crown Prince now, because he is the hinge of everything, and because most of the realm in those years did not know what to make of him, and I did. Rowan was 23 that spring. He had his father's height and his dead mother's stillness, and he had a habit that unsettled people who did not understand it. He did not fill silences. Most great ones, when a pause opens in a room, rush to close it, they talk, they laugh, they issue some small unneeded order, because silence is a space in which they are not being obeyed, and that frightens them. Rowan let silence stand. He would look at a thing or a person for as long as looking took, and then he would do or say the one exact necessary thing and no more. The court called it coldness. Some called it dullness, which was a grave misreading. I, who had watched him grow from the boy Rosalind taught to sit still on the seat of a moving horse, called it what it was, which was discipline of a kind you almost never see in the highborn, because they are so rarely required to learn it. He had learned it from her, from Rosalind. That is the thing you must hold on to, as I tell the rest. When Isolde died and Alaric went into his 6 years of black, it was the old Queen Mother who took the 2 motherless children in hand. Alara she taught the things a princess is taught. But Rowan she taught differently, because Rowan would be king, and Rosalind of Harrogate had a theory of kingship that she had spent 60 years refining and had never, to my knowledge, written down, and it went, as near as I ever pieced it together, like this: that the whole art of ruling is knowing which things must be said and which things must be shown, and that a king who has to say a thing has already, a little, lost it. Power that must announce itself is weak. Real authority is quiet. The king raises a hand and the hall falls still. He does not shout for silence, because a man who shouts for silence is confessing he does not command it. She trained the boy in that the way you train a hawk, and part of the training, I know this because I was sometimes in the room, being furniture that breathed, was a thing she called the hand of the house. It was a set of signs, old ones, wordless commands that the heir of Harrogate could give to the guard, and that the guard was sworn to obey as though the king himself had spoken them aloud. They dated, Havard once told me, from a bad century 300 years gone, when kings were poisoned at their own tables, and a spoken order might be a spoken order or might be a trap, and the house had needed a way for its blood to command its swords that could not be counterfeited by a voice in the dark or twisted by a scribe or overheard by an enemy. A raised hand held so. 2 fingers folded so. The flat palm turned down or up or out. Each meant a thing, and the meanings were taught to every man who took the throne-room post, and to no one else, and we did not speak of them. And in 19 years I had seen them used perhaps 4 times, always by the king, always in a moment when a spoken order would have been a kind of defeat. Rosalind taught them to Rowan. I watched her do it, across the years in the long gallery in the tilt yard, once memorably in that very presence chamber when the boy was 14, standing him before the empty thrones and moving his hands into the shapes and making him hold each one until it was exact. A king's hand does not tremble, she told him, and it does not hurry, and it does not repeat itself. You will give the sign once correctly, and the men who serve you will move, and you will not have watched to see whether they obey, because to watch is to doubt, and a king who doubts his own guard has no guard. I remember the boy's arm shaking with the effort of holding the flat palm out and level while she talked, and I remember her not letting him lower it, and I remember thinking, she is not teaching him a chair trick. She is teaching him how to be obeyed by men who could kill him, without ever raising his voice to them. She is teaching him that the deepest command is the one that does not sound like a command at all. He was her masterwork, Rowan. And she died, and 11 days later her son's wife decided to sit in her chair, and the boy she had made was 23 and had a guard sworn to his hand, and a rule to defend, and no king in the palace to hide behind. You see now, I think, why I have taken so long to reach the assembly. It is all there in the setting up. The rule, the veil, the woman who meant to take the seat, the boy taught since childhood to command without a word, and the sergeant in the middle who had carried the Queen Mother's veil in his own 2 hands and would, in 3 days, be asked to do a great deal more than that. The 3 days were not quiet. The court is a body, and a body knows when it is sick before it can say where. Word went through Harrogate in the way word goes through a palace, not in speeches, but in the change of 100 small behaviors. The understewards began to disagree about where the memorial assembly's chair should be set. The herald of the presence, whose whole life is the order of who stands where, was seen 3 times going into Havard's rooms and coming out gray. Lady Verena, Morwenna's daughter, took to walking through the state rooms with a measuring eye, as though pricing them. And Lord Cassius, who I have told you gave his mother good advice on the first morning, stopped giving it, and instead began, quietly, cleverly, to build her a case. For that is what he did. He was a lawyer of sorts, Cassius, or had the mind of one. He had studied the realm's ceremony the way some men study its statutes, looking for the loose stone. And on the second day I heard from Havard, who had it from the herald, what stone Cassius thought he had found. There was an old precedent. 200 years back, in the reign of a king whose name I will not trouble you with, a queen mother had died in the winter, and the realm had faced a crisis, a border war, a pretender, I forget the exact shape of it, and the king had been at the front, and his queen consort had presided over a great council of the realm, and had done it, the chronicle said, from the dowager's seat, the king being absent and the hour requiring it. One line in a chronicle 2 centuries old. Cassius had found it, and on the strength of that one line he meant to argue that there was precedent, that in a crisis, with the king away, the queen consort might sit the queen mother's throne, and that Morwenna sitting it at the memorial assembly was not a theft but a restoration of an old and lawful custom that had merely fallen out of use. It was clever. It was even in a thin way true. The line was in the chronicle. I later saw it myself. And it is the kind of argument that works, because it does not need to convince the people who know better. It needs only to give the people who do not know better a reason to look away. A courtier who suspects a thing is wrong will still not risk himself to stop it if someone hands him a scroll and says the precedent is sound. The scroll is not for the truth. The scroll is a coat that the coward can put on. On the evening of the second day, Havard sent for me. He kept a small room off the plate vault, book-lined, cold, smelling of vellum and lamp oil, and I had been in it perhaps 5 times in 19 years, always for something grave. He was sitting when I came in, which was itself unusual. Havard on his feet was Havard at work, and Havard sitting was Havard at the end of something. "You carried the veil," he said without greeting. "The first morning. You put yourself between the boy and the chair, and you carried the veil to me, and you did it without a word and without a wrong step. Why?" "It is the rule," I said. "Half the palace knows the rule. Not one of them will move a finger to keep it." "Why did you?" "I thought about it. I'm not a quick man with reasons. I'm a slow man with duties, and the two are not the same. The Queen Mother," I said at last, "stood in that room on the day I took the post. 19 years ago. She was old even then. She looked at me, you know how she looked at a man, and she said, 'Sergeant, do you know what you are guarding?' And I said, being young, 'The king's peace, madam.' And she said, 'No, any watchman guards a peace. You are guarding the difference between a throne and a chair. Anyone may sit in a chair. That is what makes it a chair. The throne is the seat no one may sit in but the one whose right it is, and the day anyone who wants it may take it, it stops being a throne and starts being only a very fine chair, and the whole kingdom is a fine chair after that, taken by whoever wants it and holds it. You are not guarding wood and gold. You are guarding the difference. Never let anyone tell you it is a small thing." I stopped. "I have stood that post 19 years, Master Havard, and that is the only order she ever gave me, and I have never had cause to disobey it, and I do not mean to start 11 days after she is dead." Havard was quiet a moment. Then he said, "She said very nearly the same thing to me 40 years ago, almost the same words." He almost smiled. "She said them to everyone, I think. She spent her whole life saying them to whoever would stand still long enough. And now she is gone, and we shall see how many of us were listening." He leaned forward. "Here is why I sent for you. Cassius has his precedent. The herald cannot refute it. It is genuine, the wretched line. It is in the book. I have argued it 3 ways, and I cannot make it not be there. So this is where we stand. At the memorial assembly, the day after tomorrow, the realm will gather in the presence chamber to honor the dead Queen Mother. And the living Queen Consort will come to that assembly meaning to lift the veil and sit in the throne, and she will have a scroll that says she may, and a son to read it out in that carrying voice, and no king in the room to say her nay. Havard, the master of the household, will refuse to lift the veil with his own hands. I have told her so, and I will do so before them all, but I have told you already what my refusal is worth. It stops nothing. She will have other hands." He looked at me, old and tired and unbending. "So I ask you as one servant of that dead woman to another, Sergeant. When it comes, and it will come, what will you do?" And I understood that he was not really asking me. He was asking me to see the trap I was in, so that I would not walk into it blind. Because here was the trap. I was a guard. A guard obeys lawful authority. In that chamber with the king away, who held lawful authority, the Queen Consort was the highest-ranking person in the palace. If she gave me an order, lift the veil, stand aside, let the page pass, she was, on the plain face of it, a person I was sworn to obey. And if I refused her, I was a sergeant of the guard defying the second lady of the realm before the assembled court, on my own judgment, with a scroll of precedent read out against me. And that is not honor, that is mutiny, and mutiny in a guard is the one unforgivable thing, because a guard that decides for itself which orders to keep is not a guard at all but a gang with good tailoring. Rosalind herself had taught me that. A guard who disobeys, because he thinks he knows better is more dangerous than any thief. But if I obeyed, if I stood aside, if I let the veil come off and the Queen Consort sit in the Queen Mother's throne because she outranked everyone left to say no, then I would have kept my discipline and broken my post. I would have guarded the letter of obedience and let the thing itself, the difference between a throne and a chair, be taken in front of me by exactly the kind of person the whole institution existed to stop. Obey and betray, or refuse and mutiny. That was the box Cassius had built, and it was, I admit it, beautifully made. I do not know, I said to Havard. It was the truth and it cost me to say it. I have stood that post 19 years and I have never once not known what to do, and now, for this, I do not know. Havard nodded slowly, as though I had passed some test by failing to pretend. No, he said, nor do I. There is only one person in this palace who can give you an order that cuts that knot, an order high enough to overrule her and lawful enough that keeping it is not mutiny. He held my eye. And he is 23, and he does not talk very much, and the day after tomorrow we shall find out what his grandmother made of him. I did not seek the Crown Prince out. It is not a guard's place to seek out a prince and say, in effect, your father's wife is about to do a wicked thing, and you are the only man who can stop it. Kindly do so. If I had done that, I would have deserved whatever came of it. A guard does not counsel the blood of the house on how to conduct its quarrels. A guard stands his post and does his duty when the moment finds him, and lets the great ones be great. But the Crown Prince sought me out, and that is a thing worth telling because of how he did it. It was the evening before the assembly. I had come off the post at the second bell and was crossing the lower court toward the guardroom, and Rowan was there, alone, which was itself remarkable, for princes are rarely alone. There is always a gentleman in waiting, a page, a hound. He stood by the old well in the middle of the court with his hands behind his back, looking at nothing, in the way I have described, and as I passed he said, not turning, "Sergeant Vale." I stopped and bowed, "Highness." He was quiet for a moment. I had time to see that he was tired, not sleepy, but worn in the way of a man carrying something, and that under the tiredness he was perfectly composed, and that the composure was the kind you build over a thing, like a floor over a cellar, and not the kind that goes all the way down. "You served my grandmother," he said. 19 years, Highness, under her eye if not in her household. She spoke of you. He said it plainly, not as flattery. Flattery was not in him. Once. She said the throne room post was held by a man who understood the difference between a chair and a throne, and that such men were rarer than good kings. I did not know, until this week, why she troubled to tell me that. He turned his head then and looked at me, and I understood that he knew everything, the veil, the page boy, Cassius's scroll, the box I was in, and that he had known it for days, and had said nothing and moved nothing, in the way of a man who has learned that to move too early is to move once and be countered, and to move once at the right instant is to not have to move again. "Tomorrow," he said, "there will be a difficult moment in the presence chamber. So I am told, Highness. I want you to do nothing to prevent it." I did not let my face change, but it was an effort. "Highness." "You heard me." He was very calm. "Whatever happens tomorrow before the assembly, I want you to stand your post and hold your peace and let it happen. Do not carry away the veil. Do not put yourself between anyone and the dais. Do not refuse any order that is given to you, however much it galls you. You will stand at your post like a man carved out of the wall, and you will watch a wrong be done, and you will not lift one finger to stop it." He held my eye. "Can you obey that?" It was, I will tell you honestly, the hardest order I have ever been given, and it was made harder by the fact that I could not see the sense of it. To let the wrong be done, to stand and watch the Queen Consort take the throne, everything in me refused it. But it was a lawful order from the heir of the house, and it was clear, and it was mine to keep, and Rosalind's own voice was in my head saying a guard who disobeys because he thinks he knows better is more dangerous than any thief. "I can obey it, Highness," I said, May I ask why?" He almost smiled. It was the ghost of Rosalind's near smile. I had seen the original 100 times. "Because a wrong stopped in the doing is only a wrong stopped," he said. "It teaches nothing. The person is prevented and resents the prevention, and tries again another day by another door and calls herself hard used. But a wrong allowed to complete itself, allowed to stand up in the full sight of the whole realm in its own chosen hour, with its own scroll read out and its own hands on the throne, and then undone, lawfully, wordlessly in front of everyone, by the one authority that cannot be argued with. That is not a prevention. That is a judgment. And a judgment, Sergeant, is the only thing that teaches." He looked away, back at his nothing. "My grandmother taught me that a king does not slam a door in a thief's face. He lets the thief walk all the way into the treasury and pick up the crown and turn around holding it, and finds the king already standing in the only doorway out. It is crueler. It is also the only lesson that lasts." I understood then, all at once, what he meant to do, or nearly all of it, and the understanding ran cold and clean down my spine. "The hand of the house," I said, before I could stop myself. His eyes came back to me, and there was, for the first time, something that was almost warmth in them. "She taught you the signs," he said. "It was not a question. Of course she did. She taught them to every man who held that post. It is half of why the post exists." He nodded slowly. "Then you know them, and you know I know them. And tomorrow, when the moment comes, you will not act on your own judgment, Sergeant. You told me you feared to, and you were right to fear it. You will act on mine. You will stand at your wall and you will do nothing at all until you see my hand. And then you will do exactly what my hand tells you once, without hurrying, without looking to me for a second confirmation, because I will not give one." His voice did not rise, but something came into it, low and hard, that I recognized. It was Rosalind speaking through the thing she had made. "Can you obey that, Edrin Vale? Can you stand as still as she taught you, and then move as clean as she taught me, and let the two of us finish the work she started, one last time?" I went down on one knee on the cold stone of the court, which is not a thing a guard on his own 2 feet is required to do, and which I did anyway because some moments ask it. "To the hand of the house, Highness," I said, which is the old answer, the one the signs are sworn to. Once, correctly, without doubt. "Get up," he said gently, "and say nothing to anyone, not to Havard, not to your own men. Tomorrow you are a stone in the wall who knows nothing and expects nothing, until you are not." And he turned and walked away across the court, alone, hands behind his back, and I knelt there a moment longer than I needed to, because I had just been led into the oldest room in the house, and I wanted to feel the weight of the key before I stood up and became a stone again. I did not sleep much. I will not pretend I did. The morning of the memorial assembly came up gray, no gold bars on the floor that day, only the flat, even light of an overcast sky, which was fitting, for we were come to mourn. From the first bell the presence chamber filled. I was at my post before any of them, and I watched them come, and I made myself a stone. They came in their hundreds. The great houses of Eldermoor and the lesser ones, the lords and the ladies, the bishops of the realm in their gray, the judges, the guildmasters, the old soldiers Rosalind had loved and always seated near the front. They came in black, and they were quiet at first with real grief. For the old Queen Mother had been loved as few of the great are loved not for softness, which she had none of, but for the thing softness only pretends to be, which is constancy. She had been the same to the realm for 60 years. In a world where everything the highborn do is calculation, she had been a fixed point, and the realm had steered by her without knowing it, and now she was gone, and they had come to feel how much they had leaned on her by feeling themselves, all together, begin to fall. At the front on the dais, the 2 thrones. The king's, empty, waiting, needing no one. Rowan had seen to it that no chair of state was set below it for himself. The Crown Prince would stand that day as a mourner among mourners, which I did not understand until later, and then understood completely. And beside the king's throne, the Queen Mother's, veiled in its gray silk, the shape of it showing through. The Princess Alara was there near the front, pale and composed. The Princess Adela, the king's sister, a formidable woman of 60 who had been away at her own estates and had come back for the morning, was there too, and I marked her, because she was the highest of the blood in the room after Rowan, and because she had a face that hid nothing, and it was already, at the sight of the veiled throne with Morwenna's party gathering near it, beginning to darken. For Morwenna came late, which is the privilege and the weapon of the great. She came when the room was full, so that her coming was an event, so that every head turned. She was in mourning black like the rest, but her black was the black that costs a great deal, and she wore the consort's crown, the lesser crown, the one that was truly hers, and I remember thinking, if she had only ever wanted to wear what was hers, she would have been magnificent. Lord Cassius came at her right hand with a scroll case of chased silver. Lady Verena came at her left with her chin up and her eyes bright, enjoying it, unable to hide that she was enjoying it. And behind them came a handful of Morwenna's own gentlemen, and I saw it and my stone self noted it and gave no sign, 2 men of the consort's household guard, her own men, not the royal guard, in her own livery, who had no business under arms in the presence chamber and were under arms all the same. She had come prepared to have hands in case the house's hands failed her. Cassius had thought of everything, almost everything. The master of the household came forward, and the room stilled, and the memorial assembly began. Havard spoke the opening words of the rite of mourning, the old words, and they were beautiful, and I will not set them all down here. He spoke of the Queen Mother Rosalind, of the length of her service and the constancy of it, of the king she had raised and the realm she had steadied. He spoke of the veiled throne beside him and of what the veil meant, that a great seat is empty and shall stay empty, and that we do not fill the place of the great dead but carry their emptiness with us as an honor. And he laid his hand for a moment on the gray silk, gently, as you would lay a hand on a shoulder, and I saw the old man's control very nearly fail him there and hold. And then he said the words that opened the assembly to the realm, the invitation for the great ones to come forward and speak their tributes, and he stepped back to his place at the side. And Morwenna rose. She had been seated in the front in a fine chair, a chair entirely fitting to her rank, and she rose from it, and every eye came to her, and she let the eyes gather. Then she walked forward, not to the speaker's place where the tributes were given, but past it, toward the dais, toward the steps, and a murmur began in the room like wind finding the first leaves. "My lords," she said, her voice carried, she had judged the room size to a nicety. "My lords and ladies of Eldermoor, we are gathered to mourn a great queen, and mourn her we shall, but we gather also in a fearful hour. The king, my husband, is 300 miles distant at the frontier, where the realm's safety keeps him and cannot return for days. His mother lies dead. And this realm, in its grief and its fear, looks to the head of this chamber and sees," she gestured gracefully at the dais, "2 empty seats, an empty crown. It sees a house that seems, in this hour, to have no one at its head. And I say to you that this is not so, and that it is unkind to the realm to let it seem so, and that I will not let it seem so." She set her foot on the first step of the dais. "Havard," she said without looking at him, "lift the veil." And old Havard, God keep him, said in a clear voice that reached the back of the hall, "I will not, madam. That veil is the Queen Mother's, and it comes off by right on the 40th day and by no hand before, and not by mine, not if you break me for it." It was bravely said, and it was useless, and Morwenna had known it would be, and she turned it to her use in a breath. "You hear the master of the household," she said to the room, sorrowful, reasonable. "A good servant bound by an old custom, and I honor him for it. But custom is the realm's servant, not its master, and there are hours when the custom must bend to the need." She lifted her hand, and Cassius came forward with his silver scroll case, and drew from it the vellum and unrolled it and began to read. He read the chronicle, The one line in its full setting with all the weight of 200 years on it, how in such and such a reign, the king being at the war and the hour requiring it, the Queen Consort had presided over the council of the realm from the dowager's seat, and how the realm had been the stronger for it, and how no voice had risen against it then or since. He read it well. He was a good reader, I have said so. And I watched the room while he read, and I watched the thing I had dreaded, which was the room deciding to be persuaded. You could see it move through them, the ones who knew it was wrong and looked at the floor, the ones who did not know and were glad to be told it was right and looked relieved, the ones who suspected and did not want the danger of being the one to say so and put on the scroll like a coat, the way Havard had foreseen. The Princess Adela's face was a black storm and she half rose from her seat, but she was one woman, and the blood of the house, yes, but a sister, not an heir, and she had no lawful power to command the room, only to be outraged in it, and she knew it, and I saw her look toward Rowan. Everyone by then was looking toward Rowan, and Rowan did nothing. He stood among the mourners at the front, in his plain black, the Crown Prince of Eldermoor, 23, and his wife's, no, his father's wife. His stepmother stood with her foot on the dais and her son reading out her false precedent, and the heir of the house stood still and watched it and did not move and did not speak and did not so much as change his expression, and I saw the room see it, and I saw the room misread it exactly as I would have misread it a day before. They thought the boy will not stop her. They thought, he cannot, or he dares not, or he does not care. They thought the coldness they had always whispered about was cowardice after all, or emptiness, and I saw the last resistance go out of the room, because if the heir would not stand for the old Queen Mother's throne then, who in the realm had standing too? And the answer the room gave itself was no one, and having given itself that answer the room fell quiet and let it happen. Only I knew that the stillness at the front of that chamber was not cowardice, or emptiness, or the absence of a decision. It was the deepest discipline I have ever stood near. It was a man letting the thief walk all the way into the treasury. It was Rowan holding the flat palm out and level while his grandmother talked, years ago, his arm shaking, not lowering it, except that now the arm did not shake, because he had grown into the thing she made, and he could hold the moment open as long as the moment needed to be held, and he was going to hold it until it was complete, until it was undeniable, until it had stood up in front of the whole realm and could never afterward pretend it had not happened. I stood my post. I was a stone in the wall. It was the hardest standing of my life. Cassius finished reading. He rolled the vellum with a small, precise motion and let the silence sit, and it sat, and no one broke it. Havard had said his no, and it was spent. Adela sat rigid and furious and powerless. Rowan stood carved out of the air, and Morwenna, into that silence, climbed the second step of the dais, and the third, and came to stand before the veiled throne of the Queen Mother. She reached out and took the gray silk in her own 2 hands. She did not need Havard's hands, or the pages, or mine. She had learned from the first morning, and she did the thing herself, which was cleverer, for a theft done with your own hands looks less like a theft and more like a right. And she drew the veil off the throne slowly, and it slid away and pooled on the dais at her feet like shed water, and the Queen Mother's throne stood bare and empty and ancient in the flat gray light, and the whole realm looked at it, and held its breath. And Morwenna turned, and gathered her costly black and sat down in it. She sat in the Queen Mother's throne. She settled her back against the high old wood that Rosalind's back had rested on, and her arms along the arms where Rosalind's arms had lain, and she looked out over the assembled realm from the seat no living person is permitted to sit in, and she was not struck down, and the roof did not fall, and no voice cried out, and after a moment, a long, terrible moment in which the realm learned that it would let this be done, she smiled, very slightly. The smile of a woman who has reached the top of a stair she was told she could not climb, and finds the view is as good as she had hoped. There, she said softly, to the room or to the throne or to the dead woman whose seat it was, Was that so impossible? I have thought about that moment more than any other in my 19 years. I have thought about how close it came to being simply the end, how, if there had been no Rowan or no Rosalind to make him, that would have been the whole of it. The wrong done, the room complicit, the throne taken, the custom broken, the difference between a throne and a chair quietly erased in an afternoon by a woman with good tailoring and a clever son and enough nerve to sit down. That is how most wrongs are done, not with a battle. With a room full of people who each, privately, know better, and each, privately, decide that today is not the day to be the one who says so. The wrong walks in wearing a coat of precedent and sits down, and everyone waits for someone else to stand up, and no one does, and it becomes the new custom, and in 20 years there is a chronicle line about it, and in 200 years someone's clever son reads that line out to justify the next theft. That is how it goes. That is how it nearly went. But Rosalind of Harrogate had spent the last decade of her life making one thing that would not go that way. She had made it out of a motherless boy and a set of old wordless signs, and a theory of kingship she never wrote down. And the thing she made was standing at the front of the chamber in plain black, and it had waited, exactly as long as waiting required, for the wrong to stand up in the full sight of the realm and become undeniable. And now the wrong was done, complete, sitting in the throne and smiling, and asking whether it had been so impossible. And the Crown Prince Rowan raised his hand. He did not step forward. He did not raise his voice. He did not, in fact, seem to do anything that most of the room could even see, and that was the whole of its terrible perfection. He simply lifted his right hand from his side, unhurried, to the height of his shoulder, and turned the palm outward, flat, level, the shaking boy's palm grown steady, and held it so. And then he moved 2 fingers, folded them in against the palm, in a small motion you would have missed if you were not watching for it, and I was watching for it, because I had been waiting for it since the cold court and the well, and once, correctly, without doubt. I knew the sign. Rosalind had put my own hand into that shape when I was young and held it there and named it. It is the oldest of the hand of the house, and it means one thing and one thing only. It means, remove that person from the presence. Lawfully, wordlessly, without harm, without argument, at once. It is the sign a king gives when someone stands where they must not stand, and no word he could speak would be worthy of the moment. It is not an order to strike or to seize or to punish. It is an order to escort. To lift a trespass out of a sacred place with your own 2 gloved hands and set it down outside, gently and completely, so that the place is clean again. I moved. I came off my wall. 19 years I had stood that post and been furniture that breathed, and the room had forgotten I could move at all, and now I moved, and I felt the room remember. I did not hurry, Rosalind's voice. It does not hurry. I crossed the marble at the pace of a man who has all the authority in the world and no need to prove it, and as I moved I saw, at the edges of the chamber, the other men of the Royal Guard come off their own walls, 4 of them, 5, the same unhurried certainty in all of us, because they had all held that post at one time or another, and they had all had their hands put into the shape and been told what it meant. And they had all seen the Crown Prince's palm go flat and level above the heads of the realm, and there is no discussion in it. There is no looking to one another to be sure. There is only the sign given once, and the men who serve moving as one thing, because that is what she built the sign to do. Morwenna saw me coming. Her smile went first, I watched it go, and then the calculation came back into her face, the door-appraising look from the first morning, and she found her voice. "Sergeant," she said, and there was an edge in it now. "Return to your post. I have not summoned you." I did not answer her. That was part of it. The wordlessness is not only the prince's, it belongs to the whole act. A guard escorting a trespass from the presence does not debate the trespass. To answer her would have been to grant that there was something to answer, and there was not. I came to the foot of the dais, and I climbed it, 1 step, 2, 3, unhurried, and I came to stand before the Queen Mother's throne and the woman sitting in it, and I bowed correctly, the exact bow owed to the Queen Consort, because she was the Queen Consort, and I honored the office even as I lifted her out of the seat that was not the office's. And I straightened, and I put out my white-gloved hand, palm up, the same gesture I had made to the frightened page boy 11 days before. The offer of a hand, the chance to rise on her own. "Madam," I said, one word, not an argument, an invitation. "You forget yourself," she said, low and furious, not taking the hand. "I am the highest lady in this realm, and I sit in this seat by right and precedent read out before this whole assembly. And if you lay a hand on me, I will have you broken. I will have you." Sergeant Vale does not act on his own authority. Rowan's voice. He had come forward at last, now, only now, when the sign was given and the hands were moving and the thing was already in motion. And he came up the chamber through the parted crowd, unhurried in his plain black, and he came to the foot of the dais and stopped, and he spoke. And for the first time in that whole assembly, the realm heard the Crown Prince of Eldermoor say a word, and the word carried to the back wall without his seeming to raise his voice at all. Because he had been taught by a master how to be heard without shouting, and the room fell into the deepest silence I have ever stood inside. "He acts on mine," said Rowan. "By the hand of the house, which is the king's own authority vested in his heir, and which every man of the royal guard is sworn to obey as though the king himself had spoken. There is no man in this chamber who does not know that the king's authority stands above the consort's. My father is 300 miles away. His authority is not. It is here. It is in me." And it says, "Rise from that seat." Morwenna's household guards, her own 2 men in her own livery, took a step forward from the side of the chamber, hands going to their belts, and I felt the moment tip toward the one thing that must not happen in that room, and it did not happen, because before their second step the men of the Royal Guard had closed. Not on Morwenna, on them, quietly, 4 of the king's own men between the 2 of the consorts and the dais. No weapon drawn, only the wall of them, the interposed body. The unhurried no that costs the other person the use of the hands they meant to borrow. Rosalind's whole doctrine in one motion. Her 2 men looked at our 4, and at the room, and at the plain fact that to draw steel in the presence chamber over this was to hang for it, and they stepped back, and put their hands at their sides, and were no longer part of the story. Cassius had thought of everything except that the king's men do not need to be more numerous than yours. They only need to be the king's. "Rise from that seat," said Rowan again, to Morwenna quietly, "or my guard will lift you from it, correctly, gently, and without a word in front of this whole realm. Choose which of those the chronicles record. You are fond of chronicles." And there it was, the box she had built for me, turned around and set down in front of her, and I understood that this too was Rosalind, was the lesson of letting the thief pick up the crown and turn and find the king in the doorway. Morwenna could rise on her own and be a woman who had made an error and corrected it, or she could be carried, gently and lawfully, from the throne in the full sight of the realm, and be that forever. Cassius at the side had gone very white. He saw it. He saw that his own weapon had been taken out of his hand and reforged, and he opened his mouth, and Rowan turned his head 1 degree and looked at him, and Cassius closed it. I stood before the Queen Consort with my hand out, palm up, and I waited. It does not hurry. I would have waited a long time. I did not have to. Because the Princess Adela stood up. She rose from her seat in the front of the chamber, the king's sister, 60 years old, the blood of Harrogate, who had been outraged and powerless a quarter hour before and was neither now, because the heir had acted and the acting had given the whole room its spine back, and she said, in a voice like a dropped stone, "Get out of my mother's chair." And that was the thing that broke Morwenna, not the guard, not the prince. The old woman's plain fury, the personal grief in it, the my mother, for Rosalind had been Adela's mother too, and Adela had not read a scroll or calculated a precedent. She had simply named the wrong for what it was. A daughter's dead mother's chair sat in by a woman with no right to it. And it landed in the room, and the room made a sound, a low sound, an assent, the sound of hundreds of people who had let themselves be persuaded, remembering all at once that they had known better the whole time. Morwenna looked at the room and saw it turn. She was not a stupid woman. I have been at pains to show you she was clever, and cleverness reads a room. She saw that the scroll had come off like a wet coat, that the persuaded had unpersuaded themselves, that there was no version of the next minute in which she came out of that throne with anything but the manner of her coming out to bargain for. And she was clever enough to take the one thing left to take. She rose, on her own. She did not take my offered hand, I will grant her that. She rose without help, straight-backed, the consort's crown still on her, and she was, for that one moment, nearly magnificent, which was the tragedy of her, that she had it in her to be magnificent and had spent it all on this. She stepped down off the throne, and I moved with her, at her side, not touching her, my hand still half raised in case she faltered, and the other men of the guard formed without a word into the shape of an escort. Not a seizure, an escort, 2 before and 2 behind and 1 at each side, the exact formation in which the guard conducts an honored person from a room, the same formation we would have used for the king, which was itself a mercy and a message both. You are removed, but you are removed with honor, because the office you truly hold is honored, even as the seat you falsely took is denied you. And so the Queen Consort of Eldermoor was escorted from the Queen Mother's throne, down off the dais, through the parted and silent and staring realm, the length of the presence chamber, and out through the great doors, wordlessly, without a hand laid on her in anger, without one word of reproach spoken aloud, in a silence so complete that I could hear the small sounds of her costly black skirts moving over the marble, and the doors were opened before her by the men at the front, and she passed through them, and out, and was gone from the presence, and the place was clean again. I did not go with her past the doors. My post is the presence. Another man saw her to her apartments. I turned at the threshold and looked back down the length of the chamber, and I saw the Crown Prince Rowan standing alone on the dais now, beside the empty throne, with the gray veil pooled at his feet where Morwenna had let it fall. And he bent, the Crown Prince of Eldermoor, in front of the whole realm, and he picked up the veil of his grandmother's throne with his own 2 hands. He straightened, holding it, the length of gray silk over his arms, and he looked out at the assembly. And then he spoke, not loudly, never loudly. But into that great silence he did not have to be loud, and he said the thing that made the day not merely a removal but a teaching, which was what he had told me by the well that a judgment must be. You have all read many chronicles, he said, and one of them was read to you today, and it was even true, as far as one line can be true when it is cut out of its book and held up alone. So let me give you the rest of the book. He handed the veil gently to Havard, who had come forward with his old face wet and unashamed of it, and he took from inside his plain black coat a folded paper, and I saw that it was old and sealed, and that the seal upon it was a seal I knew, for I had seen it 100 times on the doors and the plate and the standards of the house, the seal of the Queen Mother Rosalind. My grandmother, said Rowan, did not trust to custom alone. Custom, she told me, is a servant, and a servant can be corrupted by a clever master. So where a thing mattered greatly, she wrote it down and sealed it, and left it in the keeping of the master of the household, to be opened only if the custom were ever challenged. This morning, when I learned what was intended here, I asked Master Havard whether such a paper existed touching the throne. It did. He gave it to me sealed. I have not broken the seal, so that you may all see it broken now, and know that what I read you was written by her hand in her life and hidden until this hour. He broke the seal. In that silence you could hear it break. And he unfolded the paper and he read, and it was Rosalind's voice. I had heard it enough years to hear it rise off the page, plain and unsoftened and certain. To whoever contests the empty seat. I have sat the Dowager's throne of Eldermoor for the years the office gave me, and I have earned it by no thing but the surviving of a king and the raising of another, which is a coin no one can be paid twice. When I die, the The seat is to be veiled the 40 days and then carried to the Hall of Kings and set among the empty thrones of the dead. And no one is to sit in it between, and no one is ever to sit in it after, and no marriage, no crown, no precedent, and no need, however the hour may plead, is to put a living body in that seat again. Let them find it hard to hold an empty chair. The holding of empty chairs is the whole of what keeps a realm from becoming a thing that is simply taken by whoever wants it and dares. A throne is the seat no one may sit in, but the one whose right it is. The day anyone who wants it may take it, it is not a throne any longer, and shortly after that there is no realm any longer, only a fine chair and a line of people willing to fight over it. Guard the difference. It is never a small thing. Rosalind, Queen Mother, in her own hand and in her right mind, sealed this day. He folded the paper. No one spoke. There was nothing after that for anyone to say. The clever line from the old chronicle lay dead on the floor beside the fallen veil, and the woman who had sat in the throne was gone through the doors, and the realm sat in the aftermath of having been shown, in the space of a quarter of an hour, both how a wrong is done and how it is undone, and which of the two it wished to be part of. Havard climbed the dais with the veil, and this time the Crown Prince helped him, and the two of them laid the gray silk back over the Queen Mother's throne together, the young hands and the old, seat and arms, and down to the floor, until the shape of it showed through like a face under a sheet, and the throne was empty and veiled and honored again, as it would stay for 29 more days, and then forever in the Hall of Kings. And Rowan came down off the dais and went to the Princess Adela, his great aunt, and bowed to her very low, and she took his face in her two hands the way old women of the blood do, and said something to him that I did not hear and was not meant to. And the memorial assembly went on, and the tributes were spoken, and the realm mourned its Queen Mother as it had come to do, and the thing that had nearly happened did not become the thing that was remembered. What was remembered was the veiling. The king came home 6 days later. I will not pretend I know all of what passed between Alaric and Morwenna behind the doors of their apartments, for I am a guard and not a keyhole, and the great settles some things where no servant hears. But I know what passed where the realm could see it, which is the part that matters, for a thing done in private changes one marriage, and a thing done in public changes a realm. The king was told everything before he was over the threshold. Havard saw to that, and Adela and Rowan himself, plainly, taking the whole weight of it on his own account, that he had let the wrong complete itself before he undid it, and would answer for that choice if the king faulted it. The king did not fault it. I was on the post when Alaric came into the presence chamber for the first time since his return, and stood before the two thrones, his own and his mother's, the veiled and the waiting, and looked at them a long while. Then he sent for the assembly to be gathered again, not a mourning this time, but a sitting of the realm, and he spoke to it. And he was a plainer speaker than his son, blunt where Rowan was still, but they had learned from the same woman, and it showed. He said that he had been away, and that in his absence an old and grave custom had been challenged, and that his heir had defended it, and that he, the king, affirmed the defense in every particular. He said that the dowager's throne would go to the Hall of Kings on the 40th day and stand there empty forever by his mother's own written will, which he then had read out again, so that the realm heard it twice and could never say it had not. And he said one thing more, which I have kept, because it was the king setting the seal of the crown on the thing the guard and the prince had done. A crown, said King Alaric, does not make a person the equal of the seat they covet. My mother earned her throne by outliving a king and raising one, and there is no shorter road to it, and there will be no road to it at all after her, because she has closed it with her own hand, and I am glad she did, for it spares us the argument in every generation after this one. Let it be known in the realm, the second seat of this house is empty and stays empty, and any who sits in it, whatever crown they wear, sits in it as a trespass, and my guard will lift them out of it as a trespass, and they will be right too. He looked, when he said my guard, not at me. He did not know my name, and it was not fitting that a king should that day, but at the men of the guard along the walls, all of us, the whole silent institution of it, and I felt the look land on all of us at once, and I have never in my life been prouder of a thing I did by standing still. Morwenna kept her crown. I want to be honest about that, because it is the part people do not expect, and the part that is truest to how the great actually settle their affairs. She was the Queen Consort. She was the king's wife. She had done a grave and public wrong, but she had not committed a crime that the law could hang a name on, and Alaric did not cast her off. For a king casting off a wife is a wound to the whole realm, and he would not open it for her sake. What she lost was subtler and, I think, harder for her to bear than a cell would have been. She lost the thing she had reached for. She had sat in the throne to be seen by the realm as beyond question, and instead the realm had seen her lifted out of it, and no scroll, no precedent, no clever son could ever unsee it. She kept her rank and lost her weight. She came second at every table still, but now everyone at the table knew exactly why she was second and exactly what it had cost the house to keep her there, and she felt it, and she withdrew in the months after into a quieter and smaller life, and I do not think it was humility. I do not think she ever learned the lesson the way Rosalind would have wished, but it was at least silence, and silence was enough. The clever son Cassius left the court within the year. Lady Verena stopped walking through the state rooms as though pricing them. The precedent from the old chronicle was, by the king's order, annotated in the book itself with the truth of Rosalind's sealed will, so that the loose stone Cassius had found was mortared back into the wall, and no clever son 200 years hence would ever pry it out again. The 40th day came. On the 40th day the veil is lifted by right, by the hands of the master of the household, and the throne is carried in solemn procession to the Hall of Kings and set among the empty thrones of the dead. I was in the escort. It was the last duty I did in that whole affair, and it is the one I would keep if I could keep only one. Havard lifted the veil, his own hands this time, by right and by right, the way it is meant to be done, on the day it is meant to be done, and he folded the gray silk and gave it to the herald to be kept, and the throne stood bare in the morning light, and this time the light was gold again, the low east light I had come to treat as a prayer, and it lay across the empty seat, and no one sat in it, and no one ever would. And 6 of us of the guard took the throne up on its poles, and we carried it. I had a corner of it on my own shoulder, and I felt the weight of it, the real weight, the wood and the gold in the 2 centuries, and we bore it out of the presence chamber and down the long gallery and into the Hall of Kings, where the thrones of the dead stand in their rows, each one empty, each one a seat that no one may sit in but the one whose right it was, and we set it down in its place at the end of the row, and stepped back, and it was done. The Crown Prince Rowan was there. He came and stood before the throne when it was set, and looked at it a while in his way, and I stood my post beside it, because someone always stands the post in the Hall of Kings, and it would be me now, by my own asking, for the years I had left. And after a time he spoke to me quietly, so it was between us. She told me once, he said, that the hardest thing a king ever does is nothing that any fool can act, and it takes a great one to stand still and let a wrong finish standing up so that everyone can see it before he ends it. I did not understand her. I understand her now. He looked at the empty throne. I am glad you were on the wall that day, Sergeant Vale. I gave the sign. But a sign is only a shape in the air unless there is a man sworn to it who will move when he sees it and not before. She made 2 things at the end of her life. She made a prince who could command without a word, and she made sure there would be guards who would answer the command. I had the easier half. No, Highness, I said. You had the harder half. Mine was only to stand still and then to move. Yours was to watch your grandmother's chair be sat in front of the whole realm and hold your hand at your side until the exact right instant, when everything in you must have wanted to raise it an hour sooner. I looked at the throne. I do not think I could have held it that long. He almost smiled, the ghost of her near smile, the last of her, walking around in the world. "No," he said, "nor am I sure I could again, but I did it once correctly without doubt. She would have allowed that it was adequate." And he bowed his head to the empty throne once and turned and went. And I took up my post beside the seat that no one would ever sit in, and I have stood it, or its like, from that day. People still do not believe me when I tell it that a chair can matter so much. They hear that a queen was lifted out of a seat she had no right to, and they think it was about pride or a family's quarrel or a stepmother and a stepson, and it was those things a little on the surface, the way the surface of deep water has weather on it. But it was never really about the chair, or the woman, or the crown she kept, or the throne she lost. It was about the difference. The one Rosalind set me to guard on my first morning, 19 years before, in words I never forgot, that a throne is the seat no one may sit in but the one whose right it is, and the day anyone who wants it may take it, it stops being a throne, and the whole kingdom becomes a fine chair after that, taken by whoever wants it and holds it. She spent her life saying that to whoever would stand still long enough to hear it. She said it to Havard 40 years before, and to me 19 years before, and to a motherless boy across the last decade of her life, moving his shaking hand into the shape of a command that needs no words. And when she died and the difference was tested, when a clever, wanting woman with a scroll and a son and enough nerve tried to erase it in an afternoon, the way such things are almost always erased, in a room full of people who each privately know better, the difference held. It held because an old woman had made a prince who could stand still, and a prince who could stand still had a guard who would move. And between the stillness and the movement there was a wordless sign 300 years old that meant remove that trespass from the presence. And the sign was given once, correctly, without doubt, and answered the same. That is the whole of it. A queen who thought a crown was the same as a right, and learned in the sight of her realm that it is not. A prince who was taught that the deepest command is the one that does not sound like a command, and gave it with a flat palm and 2 folded fingers over the heads of a silent hall. And a chair, an empty chair, veiled in gray, then bare in the gold light, then carried out on 6 shoulders to stand forever among the empty thrones of the dead, that mattered more than anyone in that room but 3 of us understood, because it was never wood and gold at all. It was the difference, and we guarded it, and it is never a small thing.